Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue à l'auditorium Jacqueline Liechtenstein. Welcome to you all. I'm Éric de Chassé, director of the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art, INHA, and I'm happy to welcome you in the Jacqueline Liechtenstein Auditorium. Nous accueillons aujourd'hui, après plusieurs déplacements et repositionnements, etc., ces rencontres internationales autour de la réorientation des musées en Europe, ou des réorientations des musées en Europe. Ça correspond très fortement à l'identité même de l'Institut national d'histoire de l'art, qui a pour vocation de faire travailler ensemble les conservateurs de musées, pour le dire rapidement, en tout cas personnalités faisant de l'histoire de l'art dans le monde de la culture, et les enseignants-chercheurs des universités, et puis tous ceux qui s'intéressent à ces questions de façon indépendante, et également avec cette idée que ce que nous faisons en matière de recherche et de programmes de recherche a pour finalité ou destinataire immédiat un public qui est un public extrêmement large, et que l'histoire de l'art que nous pouvons pratiquer ici, même si elle n'en a pas toujours l'air, est toujours pensée comme ayant une dimension citoyenne, pensée à partir des questions qui sont celles de la société dans laquelle nous vivons, ou des sociétés dans lesquelles nous vivons, et pensée pour faire en sorte que ces sociétés soient irriguées par des questions qui devraient être présentes et qui pourraient apporter, peut-être pas des solutions, en tout cas d'autres manières de formuler des questions peut-être plus complexes sur un certain nombre de sujets. Cela fait de nombreuses années désormais, et même parfois, dans un certain nombre de cas, des décennies, parce qu'il ne faudrait pas avoir l'impression d'avoir inventé des choses que nous n'avons pas inventées. Ça serait à peu près le même type de préjugé que l'européocentrisme qui a conduit à penser les découvertes et les inventions uniquement du point de vue occidental. Cela fait des années et des décennies que des communautés artistiques et intellectuelles ont mis en avant une autre muséographie qui correspondait effectivement à une autre historiographie, que ce soit en tout ou en partie. Je pense qu'on verra dans cette journée à quel point les positions peuvent être différentes de ce point de vue-là. Ces muséographies et historiographies, à mon sens, les deux sont toujours profondément liés. J'ai l'habitude de dire que faire un accrochage d'exposition, faire un dispositif dans un musée ou dans un centre d'art, c'est une pratique de l'histoire de l'art, même si ça n'est pas forcément pensé comme cela, sont profondément critiques quant à la manière dont les collections et les récits qui entourent ces collections, même dans les cas où il n'y a pas de collection en tant que telle, ou des collections relativement réduites, c'est le cas d'un certain nombre de musées, dont les collections se sont constituées, conscients des idéologies nationales, voire nationalistes, voire chauvines, conscients des idéologies coloniales, même dans des pays, et c'est important de le dire et de le redire, même dans des pays qui n'ont pas explicitement participé à la conquête coloniale et qui n'auraient pas de colonie. Je dis ça parce que j'entends de temps en temps certains collègues m'expliquer qu'ils ne sont pas concernés par ces questions parce qu'ils n'ont jamais eu de colonie. Je pense à certains pays se déclarant neutres sur ces questions comme sur d'autres. Mais ce qui n'empêche pas que dans ces pays un travail réel se fasse, et même de façon très importante, je crois qu'on en parlera aujourd'hui, et des idéologies raciales, ou en tout cas racialistes, qui ont sous-tendu la naissance et le développement de l'histoire de l'art et des musées. C'est une histoire aujourd'hui bien connue et qui a encore besoin d'être développée et enrichie par plus d'exemples et plus d'études spécifiques permettant certainement des nouvelles synthèses de ce point de vue-là. Nombre d'institutions muséales, notamment les musées d'art moderne et contemporain, ont intégré cette transformation dans la structuration de leur programmation, tout en questionnant ce qu'on appelait la modernité, qu'il nous faut désormais appeler les modernités, ils ont mis à l'avant de la scène de la pensée une dimension plus large des communautés impliquées dans les pratiques artistiques modernes et contemporaines, et ils ont souligné ou laissé penser ce qu'il pouvait en aller de la part liée à l'entreprise coloniale et aux représentations possibles ou impossibles de cette entreprise dans les propositions qui étaient faites, y compris lorsqu'elles avaient l'air extrêmement éloignées de ces préoccupations et les plus pures de ce point de vue-là, ou les plus hygiénistes, mais on sait ce qu'il en est de ces idéologies-là aussi désormais. Qu'en est-il des collections? Si les musées d'art moderne et contemporain en Europe sont aujourd'hui critiques de la façon dont leurs collections se sont fondées, il nous semble qu'il est aujourd'hui nécessaire de regarder la façon dont ils appréhendent une nouvelle histoire de l'art et de nouveaux objets par diverses initiatives de recherche, et qu'il était intéressant de confronter ces diverses initiatives qui permettent d'apporter une réponse aux défis narratifs, si je reprends le terme qui est employé dans le titre même de cette rencontre, qu'elle pose. Pour y parvenir, certains ont mis en place des structures de recherche susceptibles de remédier en profondeur à cette réécriture de l'histoire, ciblant, entre autres, l'eurocentrisme des pratiques muséales, et je pense qu'on entendra aussi des développements importants sur ce qu'il en est de cette forme d'eurocentrisme. Pour mener un débat autour de cette question, ou de ces questions, la journée d'études donne la parole aux chercheuses et chercheurs, professionnels des musées, et, entre autres, qui ont piloté des projets de recherche visant à la relecture des collections et à la révision des programmations et stratégies d'acquisition. Il s'agira de comparer les perspectives à l'échelle européenne, c'est-à-dire que nous restons eurocentrés, mais pour mieux nous décentrer, avec l'idée que, effectivement, nous partons du local, de la situation dans laquelle nous nous trouvons, et nous continuons à croire, malgré un certain nombre d'événements qui se déroulent sous nos yeux même depuis maintenant un certain nombre d'années, et dont la guerre en Ukraine est la dernière péripétie, qu'il y a autour du projet européen quelque chose qui permet précisément de dépasser les formes de nationalisme qui peuvent poser problème sans non plus se noyer dans un tout indistinct, dont nous voyons bien qu'une partie des populations ne se satisfont pas, et que donc on est à une forme d'échelle. Peut-être que l'échelle nationale a fonctionné à un certain moment pour la démocratie. Sans doute aujourd'hui, l'échelle qui peut fonctionner pour nous serait l'échelle européenne. C'est en tout cas ce que j'appelle personnellement de mes voeux. Et donc c'est à cette échelle européenne qu'il s'agira de comparer les perspectives afin de comprendre donc l'émergence de cette nouvelle histoire de l'art, ou de ces nouvelles histoires de l'art, et de leur retentissement dans les musées. Je veux rappeler que cette journée d'études s'inscrit dans le cadre du programme de recherche GAP, Observatoire Globalisation Art et Prospective, qui a été inauguré à l'INHA en 2015, qui est rattaché au domaine Histoire de l'art mondialisé, qui est dirigé par Zahia Rahmani, et qui a rassemblé pendant des années, et en fait, avec du coup des choses qui continuent de ce point de vue-là, des intervenantes et des intervenants d'une très grande diversité, aussi bien dans leur rattachement ou non rattachement institutionnel, qu'à leur champ de compétences, et la capacité précisément à élargir très fortement les champs et à questionner les méthodes qui permettent de les approcher. Devika Singh, qui est désormais chercheuse et conservatrice à la Tate moderne de Londres, et qui va prendre un nouveau poste au mois de septembre, j'ai le droit de le dire ou pas, au Courtauld Institute de Londres, et donc nous sommes extrêmement heureux pour elle de cette possibilité qui lui est donnée, faisait ou fait partie de ce collectif GAP, dont vous avez certainement vu l'une des réalisations majeures, qui est la publication Sismographie des luttes, et venant de Zahia Rahmani de façon plus individuelle, mais travaillant avec tout ce matériau, l'exposition qui porte le même titre et qui continue sa circulation à travers le monde. Elle est actuellement présentée à Barcelone, au MACBA, et sera présentée au Carnegie Institute de Pittsburgh cet automne, ce qui montre bien que là aussi les musées veulent intégrer ces dimensions. Cette journée est organisée avec le Hyundai Tate Research Center transnational de la Tate. Au passage, je me permets de remarquer, peut-être que, enfin tant pis, mais que les réorientations ne semblent pas aller en cause avec une remise en cause fondamentale du capitalisme, puisque la logique de marque est à peu près aussi présente qu'elle l'était auparavant, sinon encore plus, dans un monde globalisé. Donc, je le dis parce qu'il y a quand même aussi des impensés de cette manière de dire on va faire circuler les choses. Je rappelle quand même que un des bénéficiaires majeurs de la circulation des objets et des idées, jusqu'à présent, ça a été essentiellement le néo-capitalisme. Et les plus grands acteurs du transnational sont les grandes marques. Et ça me semble une chose à avoir en tête. Je dis ça du perchoir qui est le mien, directeur d'une institution publique, et croyant effectivement que le financement public par des organismes qui sont financés par l'impôt et par des décisions politiques et résultant du vote de l'ensemble des citoyens a parfois aussi quelque intérêt et quelques avantages, même si nous adorons travailler avec des grandes entreprises quand elles font des projets qui sont effectivement très intéressants. Le comité scientifique de cette journée est composé donc de Eva-Maria Troelenberg et de Eva-Maria Troelenberg, que j'ai déjà cité, et de Sook-Kyung qui est conservatrice en chef en charge de l'international à la Tate Modern à Londres, et je la remercie très fortement de sa présence. Nous sommes toujours très heureux de pouvoir travailler avec la Tate Modern et avec la Tate Britain, comme nous l'avons fait aussi dans le passé, notamment parce qu'effectivement, la Tate Modern est un de ces lieux qui, avec une position institutionnelle majeure, une visibilité qui correspond à celle d'une immense institution, a été capable depuis, alors là, vraiment des décennies, c'est-à-dire depuis sa fondation, de perpétuellement se remettre en cause et d'intégrer les questions qui sont les questions les plus nouvelles, et dans le système qui est celui du Royaume-Uni et qui est un peu différent du système français, d'aller chercher les moyens pour le faire, effectivement, qui sont là où ils se trouvent eux-mêmes. Je ne vais pas faire la liste des intervenantes et des intervenants, je crois que Devika et Zaya le feront mieux que moi. Je ne vais pas faire de longue liste de remerciements non plus, sinon un remerciement un peu général que Zaya précisera, je crois, aux équipes de l'INHA qui ont rendu cette journée possible. I hope we have a good day. I'm looking forward to listening to what all our guest speakers have to say. I really think that some of the discussions which are going to take place here are really important, and I wish you a very nice journée d'études.
C'est un peu protocolaire. Welcome, you know, thanks very much to be there. Je me présente, je suis donc Zaya Ramani, pour ceux qui n'ont pas la possibilité de lire le panel, et j'ai en charge à l'INHA le domaine Histoire de l'art mondialisé, et qui d'une certaine manière va aussi introduire maintenant Eva-Maria Troelenberg, qui est la personne qui a initié en fait cette journée au sein du groupe dont je vais parler. Cette journée d'études s'inscrit dans la suite des événements programmés dans le cadre de l'Observatoire Globalisation, Art et Prospective, qui a été inauguré à l'INHA en 2015. Et cet observatoire est lui-même porté par le champ du domaine dont j'ai la responsabilité à l'INHA, qui traite de la mondialisation dans sa relation à l'histoire de l'art, à travers des supports, parfois périphériques à l'art, comme les cartes, les revues, et d'espaces qui semblent aussi parfois périphériques à l'Occident. Donc une grande partie des travaux qui ont été portés par cet observatoire et les personnes qui concourent à son existence ont traité en fait de production artistique, sur lesquelles je vais revenir. En 2005, de production artistique qui semble comme ça, parfois extérieure à l'Occident. En 2005, l'INHA, dans le cadre de ce domaine, inaugurait la première rencontre internationale dédiée aux enjeux muséographiques de la mondialisation en Europe. Et déjà, nos amis de Grande-Bretagne étaient très présents. Je pense notamment en 2005 à la présence durant toute cette journée aux responsables de l'INHA, du Courtauld et aussi du British Museum. Notre rencontre participe à la valorisation de programmes menés par le domaine Histoire de l'art mondialisé et plus précisément, je disais, mission du collectif GAP autour des renouvellements épistémologiques et des ressources dans le champ d'histoire de l'art. Elle participe aussi d'une meilleure connaissance des enjeux muséographiques et des bibliographies qui s'y rapportent. Je voulais aussi rappeler qu'une journée d'études a développé un sujet déjà abordé dans ce colloque par Devika, qui avait eu lieu à l'Université de Cambridge en 2013, Reimagining Modernism, Mapping the Contemporary Critical Perspective on the Transnationality in Art. Et c'était, il y a déjà de cela 10 ans, Devika, à Cambridge, avait eu l'honneur de participer à cette journée. Alors la manière dont on est impliqué dans cette journée, on l'est impliqué avec le partenariat qu'on a avec le Undal Tête Research Center, qui est implanté à la Tête Moderne, et aussi en la personne, on le disait, de ce collectif et de la présence de Devika dans ce collectif. Alors, elle est à l'initiative de cette journée qui s'inscrit dans un projet prospectif. Dans ce cadre, je voulais juste rappeler déjà qu'on a déjà mené plusieurs événements dédiés aux réflexions artistiques, culturelles dans les territoires non européens. Puisque c'est un peu ça l'enjeu, c'est la question du non-européen. Qu'est-ce que ça signifie encore aujourd'hui, ce terme, à l'intérieur des collections et des politiques de programmation des musées d'art moderne et contemporain. Dans ce cadre, Devika avait mené en 2018 à l'INHA, et toujours à la suite de ce collectif, de ce travail collectif, académie et contre-académie en espaces coloniaux et indépendants. Et ça portait notamment sur les réseaux alternatifs d'art mis en place pendant les périodes coloniales, en se penchant sur l'existence des espaces de résistance au code imposé par le canon artistique des académies coloniales européennes. Toujours dans cette orientation des réflexions artistiques et culturelles dans les territoires non européens, citons aussi plus récemment l'organisation d'autres journées d'études que nous avons menées par des membres du collectif Globalisation rétrospective, deux menées par Morad Montazami, dont je dois aussi rappeler que Morad a été en poste à la Tête Moderne en amont de celui de Devika, et qu'il avait pour aussi mission une prospective autour des collections issues de ce qu'on peut appeler l'Asie de l'Ouest ou Moyen-Orient. Mais voilà, Morad fait aussi partie de cette catégorie de chercheurs résidant sur le territoire national et qui a coopéré, collaboré dans ce cadre. Et il avait mené deux programmes assez conséquents sur les vicissitudes des collections des musées d'art moderne en zone de conflit, notamment en Irak en 2018, qui avait donné lieu au projet Bagdad Mon Amour, le musée sans mur, irakien, entre relecture du modernisme, art contemporain et archéologie, et puis tout récemment, toujours à l'INHA et en Syrie, en 2021, puisque ça s'est joué sur les deux territoires, l'INHA ici à Paris, en Syrie, 100 000 ans, généalogie et perspective du musée national de Damas. Et puis je rappelle aussi la journée qu'a conduite Annabella Tournon, qui est plutôt spécialisée dans les productions critiques et artistique d'un espace géographique, on a tendance à nommer l'Amérique du Sud ou les Suds des Amériques, faire de l'histoire de l'art en langue, traduire la théorie de l'histoire de l'art des Amériques latines. Voilà. Alors, cette journée d'études permettra d'analyser l'application pratique d'un champ émergent de l'histoire de l'art, celui de l'histoire de l'art mondialisé, qui signifie par ailleurs la nécessité d'intégrer les modalités historiques critiques des narrations muséographiques, de leur orientation et de leurs effets. Et comment celui-ci est en train de transformer les pratiques muséales. Les enjeux de la mondialisation de l'art, s'ils sont avérés, ne trouvent pas toujours pour autant leur application dans l'espace muséal. Et s'il est certain que l'histoire de l'art mondialisée excède les limites de la discipline dont elle relève, elle heurte au-delà des sciences humaines et affecte même les domaines des sciences. De plus, les implications de cette relecture de l'histoire de l'art touchent au champ mémoriel, et notamment l'histoire du colonialisme et de son héritage, autant de dimensions qui seront, je pense, analysées dans cette journée. Voilà. Alors, avant de laisser la parole à Devika, qui va donner le détail plus important de cette journée, j'aimerais demander à Sook-Kyung de nous rejoindre, qui est conservatrice en chef à la Tête moderne de Londres et qui a été notamment nommée directrice artistique de la 14e Biennale de Gwangju en Corée, qui aura lieu en 2023. Elle a dit à ce sujet, je reprends un propos, hein, « Le rôle de l'art est d'aborder notre crise commune et de proposer des orientations futures. Les conflits de race et de classe, l'urgence climatique et les préoccupations environnementales et la pandémie provoquée par le Covid-19 sont de telles crises à dimension planétaire que les artistes de notre temps l'explorent. » Elle a poursuivi en disant que la prochaine biennale, celle dont elle aura la charge, sera éclairée par une perspective non occidentale et représentera une transformation des relations entre les centres et les périphéries, des connexions et des échanges véritablement égaux et une vision pour de meilleures communautés humaines. Je rappelle qu'avant son arrivée à la Tête moderne en 2019, et qu'elle avait rejoint à cette époque le Hyundai Tate Research Center de la Tête moderne, elle avait travaillé auparavant à la Tête Liverpool et à la Tate Research Center. Alors, je vais lui demander de nous rejoindre afin qu'elle introduise aussi à sa manière, et j'en redirai un mot ensuite, David Casting qui a conduit en fait le projet scientifique de cette journée. Please, thanks very much.
Good morning and welcome, and thank you very much for the very kind introductions from both directors here. My name is Sook-Kyung, and I am Senior Curator of International Art at Tate Modern, also heading the Hyundai Tate Research Center Transnational. And as been discussed, we have been looking at a lot of different ways of curating, but also understanding contemporary practice, and going back to 20th century art history as well, to present something that is more open, but also more horizontal, and not so hierarchically Eurocentric. And it has been a very big vision for a relatively young museum, which is Tate Modern. As you remember, we only opened in 2000, and as one of this sort of newer gallery of the bigger Tate family of 4 museums. And what we can really say is to acknowledge this fantastic opportunity to work with INHA, and I thank wholeheartedly to the director, Professor Chassis, and also Zahia Rahmani, about this really hosting and opening up this discussion with us and continuing this investigation of different ways of understanding art histories and contemporary practice. For us at Tate, transnational is a term we use to provide a framework, but also as a means of understanding and researching, but also curating the ideas that art and artist and art histories are connected beyond their countries of origin. So as Professor Chassis earlier pointed out, it's very important to see how these free flows and exchanges can be different symptoms of different type of connections, but with the legacies of colonialism in particular, we have to be very aware that some exchanges and connections have been very imbalanced, to say the least, and sometimes forced, and sometimes really not originated by all sides of these exchanges. So we seek to challenge and revise dominant art histories by highlighting the global exchanges and this flow of artists and ideas, but also what context these interconnections happened historically, but also in the hierarchies of power. And it's been a kind of a great kind of journey for Tate Modern and its curators to think about these big pictures and perhaps slightly better and a bit more balanced kind of relationship within different artistic narratives in the globe. But this event particularly echoes with museums across Europe, who are also working to incorporate expanded readings of art and have begun reimagining their programs and reinterpret their collections by questioning Eurocentric narratives of modernisms. We face many challenges together, including contested histories of colonialism and its huge impact into contemporary life, as well as making progress, some small but some quite significant, we hope, in rebalancing hierarchical artistic narratives. And I hope that this symposium today will really support the development of these critical and transnational approaches to museum practice and our research. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank a lot of people behind this event. Firstly, Eric de Chassis, director of INHA, and also Zahia Rahmani, director of the research program Art and Globalization here, for this collaboration and for generously hosting us today. Huge thanks also go to my colleague and fellow convener Devika Singh, the curator of international art at Tate Modern, for her work in bringing everyone together. And I would also like to thank Natalia Sidlena, curator of international art at Tate Modern as well, for her invaluable contribution to the program that reaches to a slightly different perspective about bigger Europe. In addition, my colleagues in London, Emma Jones, our research manager, and Odessa Warren, research coordinator, who have helped organize this conference from afar in London. And more thanks also goes to Mathilde Desbois de la Roche at INHA, who has followed this project through to the end, probably up to end of today, with great attention to detail and care. And my deep gratitude again goes to Hyundai Motors, the research center's long-term partner. As you said, the sort of financial structure of museums are quite different from here to wherever else, and we do owe our great sort of activities to this particular partner and their continuing and generous support. Finally, I would like to thank our speakers for being with us today, for generously sharing their knowledge but also experience. And I am very grateful to all of you making the time to attend this symposium here today. And you are really making all our sort of effort worthwhile to be here, to really share this vision and to discuss and debate what we might be very, very passionate about and also want to really talk to the world. So thank you very much, and please join me in welcoming Devika Singh to talk about the program today.
Bonjour, c'est un très grand plaisir de m'adresser à vous ce matin. Je serai la dernière à m'exprimer pour ces introductions. Je resterai brève. À moi désormais de remercier Éric de Chasset, Zahia Rahmani et l'ensemble de l'équipe de l'INHA et particulièrement Mathilde Desbois pour tout le soutien et la confiance qu'ils nous ont accordé vraiment tout au long de ce projet. Merci beaucoup à vous. Je remercie également Sook-Kyung qui vient de s'adresser à vous, toute l'équipe du Hyundai Tate Research Center Transnational à la Tate Modern, y compris ceux et celles qui n'ont pas pu se déplacer, et ma collègue Natalia Sidlena, que j'introduirai plus tard. Alors, comme Eric et Zahia l'ont évoqué, c'est pour moi une collaboration pensée, initiée et vraiment réalisée grâce au programme de Zahia et au groupe le Global Art Prospective que tu as créé, qui persévère dans le temps et dont je suis particulièrement reconnaissante. Je tiens également à remercier tous nos intervenants, ceux qui se sont déplacés ou qui ont tout simplement interrompu leur activité à Paris pour être avec nous présents dans la salle. Et je pense qu'on se rend compte maintenant véritablement dans la juste valeur de ce que les échanges nous apportent, les dialogues, les débats, surtout quand il n'y a pas d'écran interposé. Pour la même raison, je remercie aussi à tous ceux qui nous rejoignent aujourd'hui, les membres du public, pour être avec nous présents dans la salle. Alors le thème de cette journée part tout d'abord d'une observation relativement simple, qui est la multiplication des initiatives de recherche à l'intérieur des musées. Et je rappelle que cette journée, comme vous l'avez déjà compris, a été pensée à l'intérieur de la Tate moderne, mais plus spécifiquement du United Research Center Transnational, qui fut fondé en 2019 et sur lequel on pourra, si vous le souhaitez, revenir plus tard dans la journée. Et deuxièmement aussi, d'une interrogation de ce fait sur les rôles des musées dans cette réécriture de l'histoire de l'art dont Éric de Chasset a déjà parlé, une réécriture qui vise donc dans un premier temps à mettre en lumière, mais aussi à dépasser, si cela est possible, les idéologies nationales, raciales et coloniales qui ont longtemps sous-tendu tant les collections que les programmes d'exposition. Alors, cependant, il faut admettre, je le souligne, que ce n'est pas encore le souhait de tous les musées. Donc c'est bien évidemment d'un certain type de musées, d'expositions et d'acteurs engagés dont il sera question aujourd'hui, même si, et j'espère qu'on le constatera, les points de vue et les possibilités restent multiples. Il s'agira donc tout au long des interventions que nous entendrons de questionner bien évidemment les constructions historiques conventionnelles, mais plus particulièrement l'imbrication des Suds dans les Nords et la volonté de certains musées de restituer cette histoire grâce donc évidemment à leur projet de recherche. Que fait cette recherche au musée est une des questions que nous poserons. Alors quand je parle d'imbrication et de connexion, je pense aux liens, mais bien évidemment aussi aux tensions qui n'ont pas toujours été reconnues. Et pour prendre un exemple de la Tate moderne, donc pour nous situer un petit peu dans tout ça, je mentionnerai simplement une exposition, Century City, qui fut la première exposition d'envergure organisée en 2001 à la Tate moderne. Je rappelle que le musée ouvre en année 2000, il a pour mission vraiment d'exposer l'art international, tant dans ses collections et ses expositions. Et c'est une exposition qui présente le multicentrisme de façon très forte. Une ville de par le monde est choisie pour chaque décennie du XXe siècle. On est en 2001. Alors, on commence, j'utilise le mot commence, il y a quand même des questions de hiérarchie dans tout ça, par Paris, Vienne, Moscou, et c'est plutôt après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale qu'on arrive à Lagos, à Sao Paulo, à Bombay. C'était, cela dit, une exposition extrêmement forte, car elle a pris tous les locaux du musée, ou presque, et le musée s'est donc donné les moyens de donner une grande visibilité à ce multicentrisme. Mais, cela dit, la question des raccords n'était pas entièrement travaillée, la question des relations entre ces différentes scènes artistiques. Et aujourd'hui, 20 ans plus tard, on pourrait difficilement, si vous le voulez, juxtaposer Londres et Bombay, qui étaient les deux villes retenues pour les années 90, sans se poser la question du lourd passé colonial qui ont évidemment relié ces villes, leurs scènes artistiques bien sûr, mais surtout leur société. Alors en 2022, nous le savons, l'horizon d'attente a changé et les débats sont souvent plus virulents, il faut le dire. Dans le même temps, et j'insiste ici aussi, l'histoire de l'art mondialisé reste en chantier, et ça, tant bien même dans les universités, elle est en devenir que dans les musées. Alors, comme Eric, Zaya et Sook-Kyung ont déjà mentionné, je rajoute aussi que cette journée n'est qu'un chapitre, un questionnement à l'intérieur d'un programme plus large d'événements, de recherche, initiés par le musée, initiés dans l'université et avec tous les acteurs qui sont présents aujourd'hui. Alors, il va sans dire que nous n'avons pas tous en Europe la même histoire, la même mémoire, et pourtant nous partageons des héritages similaires et nos institutions, y compris nos musées, sont confrontés à une crise d'autorité. Ça, c'est quelque chose sur lequel on pourrait peut-être revenir plus tard dans la journée. Alors évidemment, et là je devance un petit peu peut-être sur les conclusions de la journée, il n'y a pas de formule toute faite, et bon, nous reviendrons bien sûr sur les différentes possibilités, mais je l'espère surtout les défis qui s'offrent à nous. Reste que les nouvelles lectures de l'art et de la mondialisation ne touchent pas seulement ce que font les musées, il s'agit de repenser, ça c'est quelque chose auquel je tiens, à qui ils s'adressent, donc de poser la question des publics, et aussi, in fine, qui ils sont, qui nous sommes, c'est-à-dire la constitution des équipes et de nos interlocuteurs. Alors, de ce fait, nous avons conçu cette journée dès le départ. Nous avons voulu, quand nous avons conçu cette journée, voulu nous tourner vers ceux et celles qui, justement, nourrissent les musées de nouvelles perspectives et à qui, il faut le dire aussi, le musée prête justement en échange la force de leurs moyens. Alors s'exprimons aujourd'hui justement historiens de l'art, critiques d'art, conservateurs de musées et artistes avec souvent des rôles qui se chevauchent. Nombre d'entre eux ont également un parcours qui traverse justement plusieurs pays européens. Il s'agira évidemment de comparer non seulement différentes initiatives de recherche, mais en arrière-plan, les différentes histoires de la modernité et du colonialisme dont nous héritons en Europe. Alors, dans un premier temps, ce matin, nous traiterons du décentrement de l'histoire de l'art. Comment se saisir d'un passé souvent complexe, à la fois inégal et connecté, pour mettre en avant ces zones d'ombre et reconnaître un large faisceau, ou un plus large faisceau, de références non occidentales, internationales. Cet après-midi, nous approfondirons la question des musées, des objets de leur collection, de la valeur qui lui sont attribuées et des possibles relectures. Et nous terminerons en ouvrant le champ sur le rôle de la création contemporaine et de nouvelles méthodologies qui s'offrent à nous. Alors, je vais introduire ma collègue Natalia Sidlina, qui, merci beaucoup Natalia d'être avec nous aujourd'hui, et qui modérera le premier panel de la journée. Natalia Sidlina est conservatrice internationale à la Tate moderne, et comme Sook-Kyung l'a rappelé, c'est elle qui véritablement, grâce au nombre d'expositions sur lesquelles tu reviendras peut-être, qu'elle a conçu à la Tate, qui a permis un élargissement, une relecture de nombre de mouvements ou artistes qu'on pensait connus sur l'espace européen, avec un accent sur la première partie du XXe siècle, mais pas seulement. Natalia, merci beaucoup de nous rejoindre et merci à vous.
We'll try to be brief in my introductory notes. Can everyone hear me well? Perfect. It was an enormous pleasure to walk this morning through the doors of this institution, who I'd like to thank you for hosting this incredible event today, and see the works by an Azeri artist, Babi Badalov, who positions himself as a nomadic artist. The text-based work, which are expressed through the wall hangings and space transformation through installation and dialogue, they are a wonderful backdrop to this event today, which allows us to expand boundaries and look at the manifestations of modernism, which are of certain period and time, but very much still dictating the framework of museums and institutions we are involved today. So it's wonderful for all of us to walk through the installation of Babi Badalov's work this morning. And as one of curators at Tate, I should say that such an event as this seminar today, involving esteemed colleagues from the field, both curators and scholars and artists, informs our exhibition program, the way we work with our display and events presenting and reinterpreting, restaging international art. As my colleague Sue said earlier today, we like to step away from the linear and chronological interpretation, and we are interested in a multiplicity of narratives and images that address and explore connections, relationships, and exchange of ideas. Tate's ongoing research into international histories of modernist art stems from the complex history of our own collection building, which has started more than a century ago. And it still informs our current engagement with contemporary artists and our collecting activities. Those necessitate a transcultural approach, looking at the complexities and considering binaries of the actual moment in time, when modernism and post-colonialism are still shaping artistic and social structures we operate within. Negotiating the past and critically examining the contested history of modernism is an important part of this process. The cover image for this event today, you all see on your screens and on your programs, is a still from the filmed performance, which is in Tate collection, Tightrope by Taos Makacheva, an artist whose presentation you will hear during this panel today, captures the spirit of this process of careful negotiation, the balancing act, and the moment of reckoning. This panel, subtitled Reimagining Modernisms, will cast a critical eye at our continuous investigation, looking at modernist traditions with museums and exhibition practices, and through selected case studies consider sociological and human dimensions of those projects and how they further the ongoing research in the field. We will open panel with presentation by Dr. Matthias Mühling, a German art historian, curator and director of Lenbachhaus and Kunstbau in Munich. Dr. Mühling took over the leadership of this museum before it reopened after an extensive renovation project in 2013 and implemented a new transcultural and transhistorical program that culminated recently in a major group dynamic series of exhibitions and events, which he will be covering in his presentation today. Expanding on the issue of collection building in Dr. Mühling's presentation, it will be followed by our next panelist, Dr. Eva-Maria Troelenberg, Professor for Transcultural Studies at Heinrich Heine Universität in Düsseldorf. We all know Professor Troelenberg as a leader of Max Planck Research Group, Objections in the Contact Zone, the Cross-Cultural Lives of Things, and the co-author of the associated publication, Images of the Art Museum, Connecting Gaze and Discourse in the History of Museology. Professor will be examining institutional images and agencies in museums framed by two very different ambitions, both in scale and outreach, as seen through their respective manifestos and outcomes of their programs. And last but not the least, I'm delighted to welcome to this panel our third panelist, Taos Makacheva, who is an international artist from Dagestan, based both in Moscow and Dubai, and whose work transcends cultural and geographical boundaries and defies binary approaches. In the video filmed performative and participatory practices, she examines an unstable boundaries between the same and the other, acceptance and rejection through trans-historical narratives, replacing a traditional and unified reading of the past with multiple vantage points and understanding history as something that is constantly unfolding and being negotiated. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our first panel speaker, Dr. Mühling. Dr. Mühling, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you very much to everybody who contributed to the organization of this symposia. I thought, as it is a pleasure and honor to speak among all these amazing people who have a wonderful expertise and, oh, it's not working. Sorry. Who have a wonderful expertise and who are all researchers in their own respect and way. I thought I'm not talking about the content of the exhibition. It's not working? Oh, it's going to be... Not going to talk about so much about the content of the exhibition I'm presenting. I'm talking about more the structural surroundings and context of producing such an exhibition and the knowledge that comes alongside with this kind of project. So it's and I'm talking about the contradictions which are deeply rooted in our institution, in the history of art, and the way we're dealing with it, and the new contradictions we're introducing with trying to get rid of some other contradictions we had for 500 years. And I think that's a good way of working, as these contradictions are different things, and they can be a game changer in the way we discuss our shared history of art. However, the title of the show, Collectives of the Modernist Period, that's the subtitle actually, the title is Group Dynamics, subtitle is Collectives of the Modernist Periods. It's already a contradiction, as modernity states something which we don't actually know what it is or whether we're entitled to even do so. And that's the first contradiction of an institution, that all the exhibitions we're doing, they thinking of like introducing innovations instead of just thinking and implementing a structural and long-term and sustainable change of the way which we are working. And so it's already a contradiction that I'm talking here and that I'm not with the whole collective who produced that exhibition. And so they have to do some remarks on modernity, modernity always in brackets, in Germany. In Germany, modernity was never questioned, as modernity was attacked by the fascist regime of the Nazis. And after the Second World War, modernity stood for like a new German society which has nothing to do with fascists anymore, although the continuities of our fascist history were extremely strong, and still they are they are visible or invisible in many institutions, or the way we are thinking, the way we are speaking. And so it is a big thing to criticize modernity and look into the contradictions of the history of modernity produced in Germany. And on the other hand, I'm deeply convinced that if we want to change the history of art and if we want to introduce new narratives, we cannot just do it. We kind of have to think of the institutional context in which we are producing these new narratives. For example, we cannot talk about like a history of collectives if we don't speak about the labor conditions in which we are producing these exhibitions. So that's why I'm gonna show you later the colophon of the exhibition. However, it was not really an idea of our museum to produce that show. It came as an initiative from the Federal German Cultural Foundation, and they had a program which was called Museum Global. The title of that program, again, a contradiction of who is part of a global world, who is expelled. It doesn't say anything about it. It's just, let's get into a global art world as Germany. That's the idea of that was the idea of the German Federal Cultural Foundation, that German museums, they just present a Western canon of the idea of modernity. And other countries, for example, the UK or France. They have engaged with these topics long before, and we have to keep up. That was the idea, and this idea is of course correct, but introduces new contradictions. So there have been many shows of that at different museums, and I show it to you quickly. A Tale of Two Worlds at the MMK Museum for Modern Art in Frankfurt, the Hello World show at the Hamburger Bahnhof in Berlin, Museum Global Microhistories of an Eccentric Modernism at the Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen, and the show Group Dynamic, the Blue Rider at the Lenbachhaus. Lenbachhaus has the world's biggest collection of the Blue Rider. It got donated by one of these artists who was very active in that group, Gabriele Münter. And we only have that in modernity. We don't have a Picasso, we don't have a Matisse, we don't have a Manet, we don't have any British modernism. We just have a huge collection of the Blue Rider, and this artist group was active around 1911, and they kind of were very interesting, as it was a group of where many women artists were engaged. It was a true transnational group, and they had many ideas which are, of course, today very contested, but kind of have a connection to many of our interesting topics and conflicts we have to deal with today. So we kind of rearranged our collection, and the first time ever in the museum we were kind of looking into the entanglements, the colonial entanglements of the Blue Rider. That was done for the first time. It was never done before. Although all the objects of world art, so to say, depicted in that kind of program book, Der Blaue Reiter, which you can see here in the presentation, they just arrived in German museums via the colonial infrastructures and so on. I guess I don't have to dig deeper into that because you are very aware of the entanglement of colonialism into European modernism. However, upstairs, second floor, we had a new critical display of the Blue Rider, and we thought, what about other collectives around the world which are as famous as the Blue Rider? So it's not about like unknown collectives, it's about very famous collectives. And as the Blue Rider is extremely famous in Germany, it's like everybody likes it. And I have to say, there's not a single fascist or a single artist in the group who even sympathized with the Nazis. So it's for that part of the history, they kind of we're kind of happy to have that, because the Brücke, for example, has true Nazis producing modern art. So it's we kind of wanted that we can have a dialogue between these different collectives. And that's the colophon, and I'm very proud of it, because I'm the one who is from the department shaking hands and raising money. And all my wonderful colleagues, they were actually digging very deeply into into the research of the show, and all the curators at the museum from all departments, I mean, we're not very big estate, they were part of that project, and we kind of tried to get rid of all the contradictions we have already in the stuff, that we have assistant curators, they don't get so much money, we have the curators, we have associate curators, we have chief curators, we have head of collections. They all get different money, they have different contracts, and so we try to we work all together and everybody has the same voice, and all the hierarchies, we try, they of course were existing, but we kind of tried to what does it mean to us, and what kind of happens if we work all together. And there were 25 curators and experts from around the world who were actually helping with these project, as we knew from the very beginning that we cannot claim that we can just read some books and then we know what we have to do, or travel a little around and talk to people, and that's it. So it's actually that we tried to put the whole curatorial process, we put it very public, and you are invited to look into the symposia. It's completely online on our website, which happens 2 years ago, with many, many experts around the world. And I put in the PDF of the big catalog, and everybody who wants to have it is free to have it, and I think I send it to you. So, and you can always ask me. And now, I have to say, it's I have like 6 or 7 more minutes, and I'm not able to even give you a glimpse of what this project is about, but everybody here, and all your friends and colleagues, you know, you're very warmly invited to come to us. Come with your students, come with your friends, come with your colleagues, or come just on a private holiday, and we will organize that you can meet with the curators, that we can have discussions, that we can get deeper into it. And I have to say, the colophon says that's these are the institutional lenders and the cooperation institutional partners, and it's a very, very big project which kind of tries to mirror the material we are looking at, collectives, and the way which we are working inside the museum and outside the museum. And I have to say, for me, it's extremely important, and for all my colleagues, not only for me, that the curatorial or art history never ends on your desk or your presentation. It's about what is the price of the tickets we are selling, who sits at the cash desk, what do they get from the city of Munich, how they're paid, who cleans the museum, who is at the coat check, and we know we cannot get rid of these contradictions, but we can work on to make them transparent at least, or maybe change something, the asymmetrical idea of labor in museums, that security is external labor, that the curators have fixed position, lifetime positions, that the directors have very short-term positions, can be fired easily. However, you know all about this, and this needs to be addressed, and we thought, oh, maybe we can address this all in that show, and of course we couldn't, but at least we tried. So, and here is the layout, and you can see the museum is not very big, and we couldn't focus on so many collectives. And we said, okay, it has to be a time frame. And what is that time frame about? It's about 1911 to the 1980s, and that's kind of modernist movements plus colonial struggle. That was the idea. Collectives working with aesthetic tools on a political utopian vision, or maybe even practical political things. So that's, and then we said it can't be chronologically, it can't be like continent-wise or something. So it's it comes that that there are many represented groups, collectives, and that we suggest the way you go around these show. And the first room is about the impossible that is impossible to tell stories about collectives because they kind of manipulating their own history. And that's why the new measurement group and the Blue Rider did the same. The new measurement group is here from China, and they destroyed everything they did, and they just published 8 books, and so you can only read their history through their own publications. So it's already a manipulated thing. And Laboratoire Agide Art, which we really wanted to do, but it's impossible to do it in a Western museum, as it's a history of that collective doesn't kind of believe into objects which are art. It's more about people and inheriting ideas from generation to generation. So as these impossible representation, we put in a movie by Anke Majewski of the last time they walked through their space before it got teared down, and the story of that collective ended. And what I really like is, I can really recommend that reading Roberto Bolaño, who wrote a novel about being part of a collective, as he himself as an artist was part of a collective. And it's a typical thing, as in all these collectives. It's like in the beginning, it's like, I got invited, I don't know what it's all about. They called them the Vizerealism, and I have no idea what it is. And in the end, it's like when it's over, he was not part of it. It was her. And these fights they have in the end, who is part of what. And that kind of gives us like some ways to, for example, that the idea of globalization is deeply rooted into a neoliberal ideology, for example. And it gave us, in the terms of ethics of display, that we only put in photos of these collectives, which they have produced themselves, and not that it's an external thing. So, and the second room, and then I maybe, no, I have some 3 minutes. It's the room called distribution. And of course, distribution was a big thing for collectives. Nobody writes about us, so we found a magazine. Nobody wants to show us, so we create a space where we can show our artworks and we can curate ourselves. And of course, we wanted to show there are topics of collectives, and there is something which connects them all. And it's, for example, language. Class is a very big thing. Anti-colonial struggle is a very big thing. But cosmopolitanism, or maybe they want to go back to their own history because they got by colonialism in a very violent way I don't know, they got forced to not look into their own history. And the image of that room is, look, it's more complex than we could. So it's about reducing complexity to do an exhibition. And I just show you one room of a group which was very important, and it already shows like what is the distinction between different art groups. Like in Europe, all the collectives, they usually want to get rid of any kind of academic situations, education. They want to be anti-academic. But in many countries around the world, new founded academies or revitalized academies have been a very social place and idea of creating a collectivity. And so, and Suka School is one of the first rooms, and you can see the display has chairs, and on the chairs, and that's reducing complexity, on the chairs you find the terms of the typical personage of these collectives, like teacher, student, painter, tourist, poet, whatever, so that people come in, they can see, that's the personage of the, without reading much text. And there's a little architectonical element which kind of shows a typical thing in this space. Where is it? No. In this space, it's a paravent because the Uli women, which Ensuka school was very much reflecting on, they were painting on paravents. And you see, Ensuka school is extremely famous, and it's like the Blue Rider. But our audience in Munich, they have no idea about Ensuka school. So it's about introducing. And while we are very critical about the Blue Rider, we not try to be critical about these collectives we are displaying on the second floor, because we are not in the position. Maybe I stop, and I have to say that this show kind of course, came with that money from the Federal Cultural Foundation, and I'm very grateful that they kind of initiated this thing. And the idea of that federal construction of Germany, it's very important to understand that Lenbachhaus is a communal museum in a federal state, where state museums derive from mostly aristocratic collections, and the communal museum not. They kind of they are the museums of the enlightened bourgeoisie. And Lenbachhaus has been founded in 1929, and it's one of the only art museums founded in the first democracy in Germany, the Weimar Republic. And that's why we have the Blue Rider in our collection, because it got donated to us by Gabriele Münter, because she gave it to the most unimportant communal museum, because the state museums, the Bavarian state museums, all the many museums, all the directors were Nazis in 1953 and 1957. So the continuity was extremely high, like policemen, judges, teachers, museum directors, art historians. It has as a first art museum of the first democracy, and we have been a very anti-fascist museum after the war, but have been a heavily propaganda museum during the Nazi time. So that has to be everything in mind, and we could only do that show because we had the Haus der Kunst as a kind of opposite of us, and I'm very happy that I see that Chris Derkon, a former colleague and director of Haus der Kunst, came. That's very nice, Chris. And they did this all before us. We are collecting museum, very slow, very very heavy structures which you cannot change. And these museums which are not collecting, they were actually very, very fast, and they could be more contemporary. So they were always challenging us. And it's Haus der Kunst is it's kind of very close. It's walking distance from Lenbachhaus, but we could name other institutions in Europe and Germany. And so, especially this show is the federal government thinks that German museum cannot make change management. So we give them money to do so, otherwise they would never do. That's an interesting idea, maybe. And you have to kind of think whether you're the same. And I want to dedicate the show to the follower of Chris Derkon, Okwi and Wesor, because we couldn't think that show without the postmodern show of Okwi and Wesor. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Matthias. There's so much could be mined from this presentation. I'm sure we would be able to discuss it further during the Q&As at the end of this panel. But now I would like to pass the microphone on to Dr. Eva-Maria Troelenberg.
Is this working now? Yeah? Okay. Okay, just talk straight into it. And is my presentation coming up? Yeah, perfect. So I also want to thank you very much for the kind invitation to speak here today. Thank everyone who came. It's a very great honor to be on this panel also. Actually, what we just heard was a very good also run-up to what I'm about to do. In my work, I'm interested in understanding histories of museums in multiple layers and scales, rather than just from the point of view of big centralized narratives. And I will speak about this rather broadly today, but with a few examples also. And I will start with an observation which has been very central to my work on museums for several years now. The language that we use when we speak about museums is in itself almost always full of images and metaphors. Museums are not only storage or presentation rooms for images or for image objects, they also literally and figuratively emanate their own image, be it consciously or unconsciously. The images we use in relation to museums can, of course, tell us something about what these museums actually are, but very often they also entail assumptions about what they want to be or what they should be. The choice of language around museums, and I think you mentioned this too, language and the museums, thus has to do with the communities and with the individuals that are involved in them, and is immediately connected to their practices and policies of display. Let me illustrate this a little bit more clearly with some very basic examples. The idea of the museum as a temple is not only metaphorical, it is an actual image, which has informed museum architecture ever since this type of institution established itself as a representational space in the modern age. Think of examples such as the British Museum, the Alte Nationalgalerie in Berlin, the National Gallery in Washington, or, in fact, we've also just heard about it, the Haus der Kunst in Munich. The image and the idea of the museum as temple obviously works in diverse contexts. On this slide, with a few random examples alone, we see museum temples which were bulwarks of nation building, of democratic institutionalization, and even of fascism. These institutions have very different historical contexts, but they also have something in common. The canonical Eurocentric order of architecture is connected to a canonical order of art and to a teleological Western idea of history, rooted in Enlightenment humanism, drawing a clear line from classical antiquity to the present, and thus othering everything else that lies outside of this trajectory and outside of this canonical order. And here is where the actual architectural image is connected to a Denkfigur, to an idea about how the museum has to be, how one has to act, move, and relate to its holdings. It entails a particular social order and assigns a role and a type of behavior to the visitor. In this type of museum, one moves through an idealized realm, detached from everyday life, enclosed, and indeed following its own civilizing rituals, as Carol Duncan once called this. Now, of course, I'm speaking about this historical, idealistic image attached to such architectural shells. It's very clear, of course, that from today's point of view, many of the institutions that sit in these buildings are also on different levels and scales very aware of the predicament that comes along with that. I mean, we've just heard about the Haus der Kunst also and how the post-war Haus der Kunst has unpacked this legacy. And that certainly also has to do with the fact that there was the rise of new museology since the 1970s, which has, of course, questioned such static and hieratic notions of the museum. It may be no coincidence that the term of the forum, one that is important for my talk today too, has come to the fore in museum discourses around the same time, seemingly suggesting a counter-image to the enclosed austerity of the temple. In classical antiquity, the forum was, after all, the place of encounter, an open social sphere, or at least this is the association that comes along with it now. And that brings us to the issue of the historical grand narrative, because even with that seeming counter idea of the forum, we are still quite firmly within that realm of the grand narrative, civilizational narrative. Let me delve into this with a very prominent example. At the moment, one of the most debated museum projects in Germany is certainly the so-called Humboldt Forum in Berlin-Mitte. I'm showing you here a slide where you have two photos from the sort of the contemporary view of the Humboldt Forum as it presents itself to its visitors today. You see the facade, which obviously works with historical architectural shapes. You see an interior view into the forum, where you can also see this harking back to Baroque and via the Baroque to the classical tradition architecture, but it's also merges with contemporary architecture. And that is because this building is, as I'm sure you're very aware of, is a reconstruction of historical architecture. And this is a point which remains very important. I think whenever we speak about the Humboldt Forum as an institution, we need to speak about the history of its site and of this building. And I will walk you very quickly and also a little bit simplified through this with the help of this next slide. So in this slide, you see an image in the upper left corner, this aerial view. It shows the building that is the basis for the reconstruction that we see here today, the historical predecessor. That is the Hohenzollern Residence Castle, a Baroque castle situated right in the city center of Berlin, constituting really its urban center. It's right next to the Museum Island. And in this aerial view, we see it at the end of the Second World War. And it was situated in a site that was the site of the artillery battle in the final days of World War II, and also the site of the aerial war in the years before that. So it was quite heavily damaged at the end of the war. And also, then the partition of the city into the eastern and the western part meant that this ruin of the city castle, of the Baroque Hohenzollern castle, with all its imperial heritage that comes along with it, would become part of East Berlin. And the East Berlin authorities, the GDR authorities, would grapple very much with this heritage. And in the 1960s, it was decided to blow it up and basically to pull it down. That's what you see in the other image. So this cleared up a big space right in the urban center of East Berlin. And then the decision was taken to sort of rebuild something there, again, with a very big symbolic meaning in terms of architecture. That's what you see in the other image. The Palace of the People, or the Palace of the Republic, was built there. It was a very central institution for East Berlin. And then after the reunification of Germany after 1990, you would again have a situation, a very strange kind of historical echo, that you have again such a palace which is, on the one hand, technically dilapidated to a certain stage, and it has lost its function for the society. And then in the years after 1990 and then running up to the 2000s, there was an initiative, mostly by well-to-do, more conservative circles in Berlin, advocating and collecting money for putting this down, using then the open space to reconstruct the old Hohenzollern castle, to also reshape, as it was argued, the urban structure of the center of Berlin. And that is basically what happened then, under big public debate, as you can imagine. And the result is a very large and complex architectural structure, and I'm sorry that this doesn't come across as a very nice slide. I only see this now in the blown up version, but I think you can still grasp from this that it's a massive building, and then the question is, what do you do with it actually? How do you fill it? So very quickly it was decided that this should be filled with cultural institutions, libraries, universities were involved, and the core piece, which remains the most debated piece of it, is the so-called Humboldt Forum, which was, or the exhibition and museum part of the Humboldt Forum, which came out of the idea to bring the so-called non-European collections of the Berlin State Museums to the center of Berlin. So far, they had been mostly shown in the suburb of Dahlem. This concerned mostly the ethnographic collections, the African and the Asian collections. The narrative built around it was sort of presented in a very positive way, so as to move those so-called world cultures into the center of Berlin. However, it creates a really big dilemma, which still remains at the center of this institution, because what you have here is a building that recreates or brings with it again a lot of imperial heritage, which has, of course, a difficult history in Germany. The continuities between this imperial heritage and the National Socialist history. And then you take the non-European collections, which come out of a colonial history, which, in fact, harking back to the introduction today, has for a long time not been properly addressed in Germany. And the provenance histories of these objects mostly were unresearched, or at least not very publicly looked at that time. And you put those two things together, you create a real dilemma, actually, particularly if you do it in such a central space. And what results is what I would call something like a strange revenant, a Wiedergänger of history, which circumvents the 20th century. And then, in order to present itself as contemporary and open-minded, it deliberately works with the notion of the forum, in the sense of an open space of cross-cultural and social exchange and public engagement. This forum now hosts a large part of Berlin's, as I said, so-called non-European collections, and thus it has become the central site for post-colonial and decolonial debate in Germany. In this image, you can see the display in the Humboldt Forum of one of the most debated objects, the so-called Luftboot, whose provenance history was subject to heated debate around the time of the opening of the Humboldt Forum. Just a month ago, 23 objects were returned to Namibia from the Berlin holdings, and now in the very last days, important steps have been taken for restitution cases towards Benin, that means Nigeria today, from the Berlin holdings. So you can see there is some movement in this whole issue, yet one has to say it is slow and it is late. And standards of how to deal with contested heritage, both in an intellectual and in a material sense, remain certainly to be further defined. When the Humboldt Forum was opened last year, after more than a decade of strong civil opposition against its concept, it was done with the explicit claim that, and now I quote, "This forum is designed not only as a place for science, art, and culture to meet. It is to be a hub for international dialogue, for critical and self-critical thinking, and for engaging with the world and with one another in the world." End of quote. These words, I would say, sound rather random, as if they could be said about, in an aspirational sense, about almost any institution today. But notably, they are from the opening speech of Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. They are thus, of course, profoundly political. The dialogue which is addressed here is diplomatic dialogue. The engagement with the world is political engagement in a governmental sense. We are dealing literally with the macro image here, with the large scale, the grand narrative. What happens with and at the Humboldt Forum affects the nation, says something about the nation for better or for worse. The German nation remains the vantage point of whatever happens at the Humboldt Forum. And this is sort of a burden that each object related to the Humboldt Forum carries with it. That's the dilemma that remains inscribed in that institution. So against this background, all the emphasis on exchange and dynamic attached to the rhetorical image of the forum is certainly a move which might be considered also a political strategy that seeks to counterbalance the historically charged side of the Hohenzollern residence. In Benedict Anderson's theory of imagined communities, the museum appears as a government tool to enhance the imagined community of the nation. Its function is to create social order and define self and other within that social order. Therefore, such a type of forum is not, I would say, a progressive counter-image, but rather a continuation of the idea of the museum as a temple based on a canon of values. In the case of the Humboldt Forum, it remains to be seen to what extent and into what direction these values will, in fact, be open to discussion and negotiation. At the moment, it remains an admonition to always carefully distinguish between what a museum says, what image it emanates, and what it actually does. In order to do this, I would argue, and that moves to the second and somewhat shorter part of my talk, I would argue that we need to identify and enhance epistemic practices and modes of activity which don't deny or ignore, but slice through those grand narratives. And that brings me to what I would tentatively now call the personal scale. Interestingly, it seems that artistic practice has discovered the notion of the individual personal scale in collecting and display histories even before institutionalized art history and museum studies increasingly turned their attention to it. Interestingly enough, this has resonated particularly with agents outside of canonical art history, I would say, and in places which have long been considered as peripheral to the European canon of art history. For instance, novelist Orhan Pamuk built this house museum in Istanbul, his own house museum, if you wish, a spatial installation which mirrors the memoir narrative of his novel, The Museum of Innocence. This museum is it was created in parallel to the novel and the building and the installation of the museum stand complementary to each other. This Museum of Innocence was built around the novel's protagonist Kemal, who collects biographical objects as a technique of self-assurance, I would say. Connected to this, Orhan Pamuk published a so-called modest manifesto for a new understanding of museums. And now, almost for the remainder of my talk, I will let Orhan Pamuk do some of the work here, because I will quote those passages that seem most important or most interesting for me. He says, "We don't need more museums that try to construct the historical narratives of a society, community, team, nation, state, tribe, company, or species. We all know that the ordinary, everyday stories of individuals are richer, more humane, and more joyful. Demonstrating the wealth of Chinese, Indian, Mexican, Iranian, or Turkish history and culture is not an issue. It must be done, of course, but it is not difficult to do. The real challenge is to use museums to tell, with the same brilliance, depth, and power, the stories of the individual human beings living in these countries. Big museums with their wide doors call upon us to forget our humanity and embrace the state and its human masses. This is why millions outside the Western world are afraid of going to museums. The future of museums is inside our own homes." End of quote. Now, I would say these are partly rather radical claims if you look at them closely, and I would not follow them in every point. I would, for instance, not consider personal and intimate stories as detached from or in opposition to the works and narratives of canonical museums, but rather in dialectical relation to them. They provide a gateway to our understanding of individual agency, to the relevance of small-scale, idiosyncratic collecting, and for that, just another illustration from the Museum of Innocence, so idiosyncratic collecting and mind-setting, as it were, and its relation to the development, continuity, but also the diversification of grand national and institutional narratives. Let me just mention that in Pamuk's case, the radicality of this claim is also clearly to be considered against the increasingly nationalist politics in Turkey today and the instrumentalization of the country's rich but very political and institutional museum history. This would be a different story to tell, but it does tell us something about how this move towards the personal and the intimate is, of course, always seen complementary to bigger political developments as well. Pamuk then presents his more general conclusion as a very simple one. That's again a quote, but one that implies fundamental shifts. He says the picture is in fact very simple. We had epics, representation, monuments, histories, nations, groups and teams, large and expensive. We need novels, expression, homes, stories, persons, individuals, small and cheap. And I actually put the URL for the entire manifesto, which you can see online on the slide. I find it remarkable that this was written well before we globally moved into the destabilizing crisis of the pandemic, before climate change aggravated on this fast pace, before the Black Lives Matter movement contested monuments and other modes of representation related to histories of slavery. It seems that a modest manifesto is at the same time a resilient one. I would argue that many difficult questions of the art and museum world, from contested ownership to post-colonial perspectives to sustainability, all those questions which require a new, extended museology, can be addressed in their complexity, or at least better addressed in their complexity, if we take different scales of the museum into account. A theory of scale, and that is also how I call it tentatively while I'm still thinking about it, from the national to the personal and the intimate, can readjust the function of museum and exhibition practices for society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Absolutely wonderful presentation. And I would like to pass the microphone now to Taus Makacheva to bring this discussion to bring this panel to the close.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to Tate, INHA, Devika, Natalia, Odessa, Emma, Sook-Kyung, Zahia, Eric, and everyone on the team who I haven't met. My talk is entitled Wormholes as... Too loud? I'll just put on a timer. My talk is entitled Wormholes in Museums, and I think about wormholes as methodologies in creating works, and I'll talk about it through my own practice and through practices of a few other artists that I admire and lean on, and more wormholes as things you encounter in museums. What I mean by wormholes as methodology is that whenever we work on a project or research it, we travel through timelines and pick something out. And then through that traveling and through an act of digestion, and I'm here paraphrasing Paul Preciado, who talked about digestion of the archive, and I think of my sort of artistic methodology and methodologies of a lot of artists as an act of digestion. It produces an artwork, which is exactly kind of the sense of you're in the museum, you look at something, and you're transported elsewhere. You feel like someone's taking you by the hand and taking you to a story, into a space you couldn't encounter in any other way. And also, I guess it's this transportation, and it's this bending of time, bending of space, when you step in A and end up in Z instead of going to a point C through B that I'm interested in. And I'm also kind of interested in this moment which Sarah Ahmed calls a feminist clique, which can happen in the museum. Not necessarily feminist, but kind of any form of a clique, I suppose. Another thing that I wanted to mention as overall sort of impetus from which I work, and this is something that I've heard spoken earlier, is co-ownership of history of art. I think about art practice as standing on the shoulders of giants or other artists, or the whole history of art. which belongs to sort of multiple geographies, multiple timelines, which includes all histories of art and the works therein. And what if we consider this point as a point of departure? So I'm thinking a lot about studio structures and artist studio support structures, which is also something that sort of leans into this co-ownership of art history. But this also kind of places a certain responsibility on you as an artist or any practitioner. If you start from co-owning everything that's been done before you, you have to be ready that your practice will be dissolved in exactly the same manner in other practices. If you're taking the step after someone else, your practice is the step for someone else. And this is where the focus of my studio kind of is very much on archiving. We lecture on archives, we lecture on studio structures, and we're kind of archiving rather obsessively. We're archiving methodologies exactly for that reason, so that they can be absorbed later on. And that's sort of where studio support structures are from. So in a way, I think this is kind of a short intro, and then I'll go into kind of speaking about more projects, which hopefully illustrate the points that I'm making. I'm also thinking about the practice as liminal space, where rules slip up, and sort of so-called peripheries and so-called centers are bent inside out. This is just a research image. I'm not going to talk about tightrope, which has sort of kindly been placed as an image for this conference, but this is an archival image of Kurban Medjidov from 1950s, and this is the great-grandfather of the tightrope walker that was in our film. So I wanted to start on that balancing, archival balancing, as a first image. And another work I wanted to address, which is quite important for my methodology and was an important encounter in my artistic practice, is Amina Menya, Enclosed. And this is it was a monument, it was a research project on the monument of the dead in Algiers, which was commissioned by the French for the Arab and French soldiers which died in First World War. And in the end of 70s, mayor of Algiers invited Mohammed Issakem to sort of hide this monument or like, I don't know, encapsulate it in some form. And I was really astonished by that invitation in the first place. So what he did, he decided not to destroy the monument, but built another monument around it. Amina, she did a sort of like research project on archiving, an artwork basically with a strong base in research, because that monument gave a crack, and you can see the previous monument inside. And I'm very much interested in these encapsulations, because I come from a space that loves to bulldozer over histories and then building something anew. And I really like this sort of like matryoshka doll, when one is inside of another, and that's kind of Amina Menya's project, to me, is a very beautiful example of that, and of the methodologies that I also feel strongly about, so like as a form of a capsule in a way. This is another work by a friend of mine, John Jarrett, and it was a very important work for me in 2012 when I saw it. Infinite Freedom Exercise near Abadan, Iran, from 2011. And at the time, I was trying to resolve what to do with my work, Gamsutel, which is based in this abandoned mountain village in the mountains in Dagestan, southern Russia, North Caucasus, became part of Russia in 1860 as a result of Caucasian War. Sorry for this short historical trip. And when I saw the way, so he worked with American manuals for postures, what postures one has to take when you kind of shoot a certain type of missile, and then made a choreography based on that. And that's when I realized it's like, oh, you can work with your choreography in a very different way. You can narrate a story through body and not narrate it through necessarily words. And this sort of kind of bled into the first work that I'm going to talk about, called Gamsutel, where I was trying to do exactly that. I was trying to build a story of a space through a form of body language. And we'll watch just a few excerpts. These are some of the references for the work. This is a painting by Franz Roubaud of the sort of Russian-Caucasian War, where Dagestani basically, I don't know if you can call resistance, is attacked by imperial army. And he, in the first part of the film, he repeats movements of both armies, the Highlanders army and the sort of army of the Russian Empire. The second part is reference on the dance of a collective farm brigade leader, because a lot of the people were moved into from Gamsutel to collective farms that were kind of very popular in the Soviet Union. So it's this sort of choreography of existence of a certain, I don't know, you can say archaeological site in a way. Another work, and we're started very far, and we're ending in 2020, something that I've done in during the pandemic, and as I call it, was very influenced by Instagram research and the algorithms of jewelry that was also kind of constantly put in my face. The work is called Mining Serendipity, and it's unlimited, unsigned, numbered edition, because I always think about the ecology of the project. It was commissioned by France Material Centrum, and it's a non-commercial centrum in Belgium, and for them it was important to make the work accessible, so it's priced which is kind of relates to ecology, as production costs, and it's unlimited. So it can kind of exist forever, and it plays with the market. I mean, I kind of like to play and poke with things. But conceptually what it is, it's a toolkit for understanding the world. We took different concepts, like coincidental plagiarism, multiple discovery, morphic resonance, and I'll talk a little bit about them a little bit further, and reworked them and made them and claimed them as our own in a way, for a very different thing, for kind of to foster a generative approach in understanding the world. So for example, one pendant is based on, and I call them body-oriented artifacts, which comes actually from an article by my mother, who's an art historian, where she talked about traditional jewelry as something that structures your physical body, psychological body, spiritual body. And one of the pendants, which is now you can see in a candy on the top, you put it in your mouth and it becomes sculpture for the mouth. And it has, it's a porcelain walnut, and it's based on this idea of highly autobiographical memory, but we remade it into it's based on highly autobiographical memory. We remade it in highly biographical memory, and spoken about it as a way, if you wear that pendant, you're instantly aware of biographies of people that surround you. So a lot of these artifacts, they're about kind of mere synesthesia, heightened empathy, and different relationships to the world. The one that you see in the middle is called Morphic Resonance Compass, and it's based on the idea by Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about morphic resonance in birds, when they know where to fly, where to lay eggs, where to die, and I mean, wouldn't it be great if we had one as well? So you can sort of open it up and choose a direction for the compass. Another two things I'll talk about. The square pendant is called Remote Synesthesia Crystal, completely made up, obviously, but based on mirror touch synesthesia, when you see someone hurt and you feel their pain. Remote synesthesia functions at a distance, but same effect. You know, you don't see anyone, you don't have to see anyone to feel the pain of another. And something else in the left corner, it's called syncochord nuggets, and it's based on the ideas coincidental plagiarism, multiple discovery, and steam engine effect. And all these things, they describe when people, be it scientists, artists, musicians, come up with the same ideas at the same time, just because of the feeling of sort of time. And I think we've like all been there potentially. Another work that I wanted to talk about is an artist menu, Stomach It, that I've done in 2017. And it was done for a show dedicated to 100 years since Russian Revolution. And I started thinking that, you know, there's very little stories of the people and starvation that was sort of prevailing throughout the whole country. So I wanted to create a menu which included a speaker with a sound of rumbling stomach, just a glass of water with a story of me interviewing Pir Magomed, who was 93 years at the time, who was in a workers' camp in Kazakhstan, and who asked a ridiculous question like, "What did you have to drink?" And he was like, "We just wanted to drink enough water." And sort of my questions was included in the booklet. Food stamps, because everything was you could only get bread with a food stamp, and for example, housewives had 0 grams allocated per day. Smell of fatty soups, because a lot of people had like hallucinations of food smells. Pane de la fame, I guess you can say. Somebody said it like sort of hunger bread that people tried to make from straw and hay. And here are some more images from the booklet with the short poem by Marina Tsvetaeva. If you're a soul born with wings, what does a hut mean, or a place of kings? What Chinggis Khan and what a horde. I have 2 foes in the whole world. They are the twins in one image united, hunger of hungry and glut of the glutted. So there was a short text. These are the norms for coupons that I mentioned. Since this is the norms from 1929, 0 traders, clergy, and housewives under the age of 56. Some accompanying information. And the last thing was a lollipop in a shape of Lenin's head with a chewing gum inside, which was accompanied by a small sort of ribbon that said, "New revolutionary lollipops with chewing gum inside give shape to the leader's brain." So you sort of like suck on power, chew on the brain, and let's see what comes out. So yeah, once again, back in the loop of digestion, I suppose. Another work that I wanted to mention is called Charivari, and I've done it in Baku. It was very much dedicated to history of Soviet circuses and the space of potential freedom. And it included an installation which was a little bit like a dreamscape, but also a little bit like a drawing in space, but also maybe something like you can find on an archaeological dig, a bone, a remnant. And also included an audio piece that was written by Alexander Snegiryov. I mean, you see all the credits. It's a very big party that we're using in order to make this party, the circus party, and costume design by Panika Derevya. But costumes were unwearable, and audio was something I guess you could imagine. So these are some of the references, some of the stills from an actual installation, which is, maybe a memory, maybe this faint imagination, 3D that we were very proud of at the time. And these are some archival images from Baku Circus, very animal-friendly circus. And it's actually started off when I was working on tightrope, and I found a film from 1967 on Soviet circuses where different republics had sort of like different performances and different groups. And that's how I actually found the tightrope walker for tightrope. And on the right, you see a famous dynasty from Azerbaijan called Nazirova, which we also interviewed, because also part of the process are a lot of the conversations which we have when we make the work. These are some of the sketches of unwearable costumes, which are maybe the ghosts that live there or can potentially live there one day. Acrobat, I call him Disco Ball Man, but also he's a bit of a spaceman, because a lot of the programs and scenarios in the circus were about space travel and space programs at the time. Master of the ceremony, I call her a curtain woman. She's an animal tamer, tightrope walkeress, and this is how they looked in the space. And we will listen to a short excerpt from the audio that was in the space.
Dear friends, we extend to you our very warmest welcome. A whole host of maestros of the circus arts will be taking part in our festive carnival and circus performance. All will be costumed accordingly and will perform alongside trained animals. You will witness the extremes of human ability, violations of the laws of gravity, and transgressions of accepted ethical norms. You will hear sparkling, unforgettable dialogues between man and beast and man. Parading before you first will be dozens of athletes, stunt motorcyclists with banners flying, followed on the backs of bowed acrobats by plastic lion tamers, keeping their charges on a short leash. Approaching the royal box, they will hand floral bouquets to the respected elders and prominent spectators. Emerging next onto the arena will be pyramids of inflatable elephants. Standing on them, hippos. Standing on them, poodles. And on them, a giraffe. Once they leave the arena, numerous inflatable flamingos half filled with brandy will be released into the sky. All this will no doubt be rapturously received by the visiting public. Musical accompaniment will be provided by brass fanfares and a group of harpists. The creative abilities of the trumpeters and harpers will be warmly received by the audience. Then, mobile platforms will be rolled into the arena, adorned with garlands of fresh flowers, lettuce, coriander, parsley, and trained Baku tomatoes, as well as sturgeon caviar. If you've never heard of such tomatoes before, you soon will. As you all know, the main property of Baku tomatoes is to disappear. They can disappear better than anyone else. No magician can rival them. Here they are, and then you look again, and poof, they're gone. Only sturgeon caviar can be compared with them when it comes to the mastery of vanishing acts, due to its similar talent for instantly dissolving into space. Our trainers have achieved amazing results with Baku tomatoes and sturgeon caviar. Not only do they disappear now, they've reached a point where they don't even appear in the first place. Nobody except these trainers has ever even seen a tomato with caviar. The axles and all moving parts of the floats will be smeared with crude oil to avoid squeaking. Special sprinklers will spray a mist of pomegranate juice in all directions. A very healthy natural beverage, saturated with vitamins A, B, C, and E, and rich in iron, calcium, potassium, phosphorus, and magnesium, as well as folic acid and antioxidants. All this will surely be greeted with great enthusiasm by the visiting public. The audience will be presented with acts performed by synthetic bears, a talking horse, a lion ventriloquist, a touchy sheep, a strong woman accountant, 2 elephants, and 1 big-top king pole. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, on with the show.
So you sort of, you see that you encounter kind of all of these, I don't know, all of these visitors, crude oil, mist of pomegranate juice. I'm at the end of my time. Can I request 4 more minutes? Is that okay? Thank you. And this is, the show is now on at Jamil Art Center, and we've done a very different flat pack version, as I call, and kind of with also very different figures that now populate the circus, because we just like to make things differently every time, with sort of a snake woman, a parrot, and other entities. And this is actually a short video from from when the work was shown at the Fries Museum in the Netherlands, and local theater students have made their own performance and that's them. And to me, this was a very valuable sort of like absorption and reworking into somebody else's work. And this is just like a short clip of what they've done.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cirque Illusia.
And it sort of carried on, and they completely sort of like landed their own narratives within the whole exhibition, and it was kind of beautiful to see how it turned into their project and their work. And last thing I wanted to talk about is a new commission that I'm working on now for the Fries Museum. And I couldn't decide what to do for a while, and I was kind of turmoiled between the desires of an institution, my own desires, and how to merge them. So I decided to make a work about these desires and make sort of a ruler of desires, where the most desirable work for the institution was kind of a sketch that you see now is this Drunkling house, which is a house for sailors that, you know, have suffered a crush and they can sort of like stay there. And we're making it into a bronze copy, possible to reproduce, can be kept only in student offices, so temperature control, perfect work for sort of like museum collection director, keeper. And then on the other side of it, we have other objects, like for example, this pantheon, or like a form of folly that is made of inflatable capsules or boats that can be used as sort of a party place or a swimming pool, but also it's incorporated in the text that we're writing together with Tom Jeffries, which is at the other end of the spectrum. And the way it's incorporated is that right now we're imagining a scenario that everything is deaccessioned from the museum. Things are returned to their owners, things are returned to their countries of origin, whatever is could be dissolved is dissolved, and few of the works that are left, they're moved to higher grounds, to other museums. And in a case when everything floods, this pantheon can be used as capsules. So you kind of end up with a floating world, and then a couple of Rembrandts or whatever wasn't claimed, you know, are floating in these capsules. Another thing that we're making is a party box, and this is a party box with the mask of a museum director, a confetti for the bath, a tub with puppies. But this is also kind of has to do with interviews that we've done, and one of the museum employees said that the only thing is missing from the museum is a bathtub full of puppies and a beautiful man. So we kind of incorporated that you can have that, and it's also in the stories written by Tom. Unfortunately, I can't go too deep into it. But one of the things I want to end with is a museum game that we've also developing as part of that party box. And it has various cases, and I'll read them out to you, where there's a question by the sort of game leader, and then 5 answers. And the player is allocated an answer that he has to prove. And the answers are connected to a position in the museum. So the one that proves it best, earns a point, and so on. So case number 1, a 91-year-old woman, while visiting museum, saw a crossword puzzle displayed on the wall and completed it with a ballpoint pen. This was a work of art belonging to an avant-garde artist. First answer, not a problem. It was part of the social program designed for senior visitors over 80. Second answer, the culprit must be sent to the police station and sentenced to lifelong personal ban on solving crossword puzzles. Third answer, the insurance company should be called and damage estimated and the work sent to restoration. Fourth answer, if life gives you lemons, make a lemonade. Let's place a copy along with the original for visitors to complete. Fifth answer, an age limit for the museum entry should be set. So you sort of like, you jump through these positionalities within the museum. And one more. After commissioning a new artwork for the museum, an artist had a lot of pigment left, which they generously donated to the museum. What should be done with this donation? First, let's turn into the eyeshadows and gift it to patrons. Second, to the archive immediately. Third, we could consider exhibiting the pigment as part of the art commission to sell it on the auction. Fourth answer, another artist needs some pigment for their new artwork. Let's redonate it. Fifth, we can use this pigment to finally start fingerprinting dangerous visitors and add them to museum database. Sixth, please just throw it away. We don't have any space, neither in the archive nor in the storage. It's something we shouldn't keep in value. And I want to end this image prior to lunch with the dessert in a shape of a wormhole. Enjoy your break. Oh, after the questions. Thank you very much.
Matthias, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. Always a pleasure to see another Tate work discussed with such an eminent audience. Gamsold is also in the Tate collection. And I should say that mine serendipity is on my personal Christmas shopping list. So next time you'll see me, I'll be wearing it. Absolutely brilliant how with a degree of humor, interaction, telling very personal stories based on deep archival research, you can cut through all the institutional barriers and break glass ceilings, and that you continue doing so. I would like to thank all the panelists for the presentation and bring this panel to a Q&A portion of this event. I think we will have about 20 minutes. So if anyone has a question, I'm going to be passing microphones around. Mathilde? Est-ce que Mathilde? Mathilde? No? Microphone, passing the right microphone.
We have a question?
There's a lady over there.
Just a question of terminology. So you were saying at the beginning that it's about global, I'm addressing, yes, I'm very interested in this organization that I didn't know about, the GAP. But I was intrigued by one thing, terminology saying that it's central, self-centered European network that is questioned, and it should open to non-European global art. So my first question is, what about the fringes of Europe? Do you think they are well represented in today's museums? Let's say, are they better represented than the Dada movements in Europe, for instance? I mean, what about the, modern art in Hungary or in the Eastern Europe bloc? Do you have many collections of Eastern European avant-garde art in Europe, in the Tate, I know the Tate, I know there are some, but very, very small representative of Eastern European, of South European, of Greece, of Northern European. So isn't there, when you say that you are actually non-European, open to non-European collections, do you think we're all done with what is the fringes of Europe? That's one question about terminology. And the last one...
Can we take the first one, answer it, and then move on? So I will ask Eva-Maria to answer the first terminological part of it. Sorry, Matthias. Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you very much for the question. Just a quick answer. In our project, the term non-European was never used. Did I use it? Okay. So we had a group which was called the editor group in that, and it was about what kind of language we are using and what should be the language for that project and what terms are contested and so on. And so we decided not to use the term non-European at all. And you are right, very quick. I think I didn't talk about structural racism, and that was a big topic in our project. And there is a lack of looking into Eastern Europe or post-Soviet states and history of the avant-garde, which was deeply connected before World War I to other European countries which have been disconnected. And we invited the Gruppo AR from Łódź in Poland, because we thought we have to we were thinking of having no collective from any European country. And then we decided to have Gruppo AR because we have to fill that gap or claim that there is something which we have to take care about. And there is a structural racism alongside these segregation between West and East. And it's funny that I made this mistake in my funny English, and I can't pronounce an R because I come from a very northern German little village. And so I made this mistake, whether you noticed, between wall and war, which kind of was Freudian. And as a result, we wanted to establish a long-term relationship with the Museum Stucki in Łódź, because we are very connected to them. And this research thing, which should be very sustainable and not end up in like shipping loans from this part to this part, because that's a big contradiction in our project. It's not very sustainable at all. It's actually terrible. And so we wanted to establish this long-term relationship with the museum in Stucki in Łódź, and which had the topic anti-fascist avant-gardes. And it was a beautiful cooperation, and it stopped because Jaroslav, the director of the museum Stucki, got fired.
Yes.
And that's a very sad thing. And what you're saying, that's a blind spot in many museums, not in the collection in Germany. It's very present in many other museums, but not in Lenbachhaus. And I'm sorry that I didn't touch that point, but you're right.
May I add a few words on behalf of Tate, another museum institution, and following on Matthias's note on AR collection museum, the oldest museum of modern art in the world still functioning, that one. Absolute unique place in the art history. The collection, which was built through gifts and donations by avant-garde artists, concrete artists, constructivist artists around Eastern, Western Europe and the Americas. Yes, unfortunately, with what is happening in the art museum sector in Poland and in Hungary at the moment is quite a worrying situation. A lot of doors get closed with new administration arriving into the museum sector. But in terms of collecting, I should say we have an entire acquisition group dedicated to the region, and not only to Eastern Europe, to other non-European regions. There are 7 groups, geographically located 7 groups, which allow us to collect from across the globe, and any gaps in the collection are addressed through a very diverse exhibition program. Only this year, we've opened it with Surrealism Beyond Borders, showcasing surrealism tendencies from across the globe, Mexico, Japan, Eastern Europe, and so on. Then the 2 exhibitions which will follow later in this year, it's the exhibition by Abakanovic and Bartushova, again from the Eastern European region. And we balance our program both on acquisitions and exhibitions, as well as events, film, video art program, and performance program every year like this. So the program is very diverse. If you come to Tate every year, you will see the work we are doing with transnational, transcultural, and transhistorical. And you had the second part of your question? Oh, sorry, there's another. May we allow time for Devika? You wanted to ask a question.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you to all of you for this great panel. I had another question for Matthias. Sorry. You spoke about the making of the exhibition and you spoke about funding. And I have a simple question, which is what happens when the funding from Museum Global runs out? From the Kulturstiftung des Bundes, of course, and you explained the structure, their initiative. We know how expensive post-war was at Haus der Kunst, and that was in the media. We also know at Tate how expensive eventual like Century City was, and I can sort of assume how the same thing goes to your exhibition, and that pertains to international loans, even if sometimes what we put on show is not objects-based, and so forth. So how viable is it? How can one repeat it, even if not everything has to be done on such a scale. What next without the funding from the government, or so much funding from the government?
Yeah, thank you very much. We're going to make a museum game, and you can buy it, and then we are funded. No, it's a good question, because Okvi's show, huge depths, our show, huge depths, and we can't go on with this. It's not the way, it's not the future, not at all. Second is, like, we decided, the team at the museum, that we don't have any corporate funding. We only have foundations, like, who operate on a societal level. So it's not about having a lot of money for expensive projects. It's about having a transparency about what money is involved and where it comes from. And now we kind of reviewing all the problems of the Museum Global program, and that's a big thing. And for example, acquiring works, we decided not to acquire any work, because we said, oh my God, we can have this. It's so inexpensive, and then we can be global. And so we said, no, we're not the right institution to kind of be responsible for certain things. And I could go on and go on and go on. And as a result, we wanted to have long-term relationship with museums across the world, which could be institutional partners for us, and we actually, and it didn't work out, and it was all about, we cannot, like, ship all these things across the world from Nigeria to, it's not sustainable at all, and we want to be carbon neutral in 2030, and so on and so on. And we're going to have a 10-year collaboration with MESB, maybe.
Thank you so much, Matthias. I understand Eva-Maria has a follow-up question.
Yes, indeed. I have a question that somehow relates to this. So you spoke about how the colonial entanglements of the Blue Rider sort of have not really been looked into properly, and I would agree that indeed there has been some work on that, I think, in the context of a rather superficial debate about primitivism, so-called primitivism, but it has never been done with the sort of theoretical rigor that one would demand of such topics today. Now I'm wondering, my question goes in the direction of the relation between the exhibition and the permanent presentation of the core of your collection. So those things that you, when you go through the exhibition and look with this perspective of group dynamics, discover new angles in your own collection, if there is such a sort of flowing back into your permanent presentation, and also if in the permanent presentation there is sort of a how are these entanglements addressed then in the permanent presentation of the Blaue Reiter?
Yeah, as I talked maybe too much, we don't make a difference between permanent, we just have exhibitions. Mm-hmm. And the Blue Rider is actually on display and is and it's very explicitly addressed in that display at the moment. We published a big book which kind of gives a very all the facts. We were researching all the facts. What kind of connections have been to colonies, and what kind of racism is roots inside there. So it's very visible, and you can read it in many texts on the wall in the books.
And an excellent website, Matthias. I use it very often. Absolutely great website your IT team put together. A great resource I recommend to everyone. I understand we have time for one more question. Two more questions. Great. It's getting better and better.
I'll be quick. This is a question for Eva. I was struck by your examples and your sort of connecting the building of the Humboldt Forum into Ben Anderson and that idea of the museum as a tool. And sort of my sort of provocation, as it were, would be that Ben Anderson's structures of community are sort of collapsing. So the technologies that he was basing it on around sort of the newspaper, that's disappeared with the sort of social media. So there are new kinds of communities that are being created. And some of the pressures on the museums are also coming from these new types of communities that are beyond the nation. So the idea of restitution is not a national issue. And I wonder this idea of a national champion or a tool is kind of out of its time.
Yeah, you absolutely nail it, I would say, because the sort of the subtext of my talk is really the crisis of the institution. That's what I'm talking about. And the sort of probably could have made this more explicit. Of course, now we see these restitution movements which are sort of sold on a very grand national scale, but there's a backstory of 20 years to that, and that comes out of activism. And that was from the same people who are now sort of presenting the restitution as a success. There was a long history of resistance to that as well. Yeah. So that is indeed what I'm trying to say, is that there is an institution that sort of walks around with an image, but then we have to see what actually happens below the surface of this grand institutional image. Yeah, indeed, and it's about the collapse, or at least the crisis of institutions, which I think is really a topic of our days in many ways. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Is there another question from the audiences? Yes, please. The microphone is coming.
Hello. Hello. I had a question for Taus. I was wondering whether you could tell us more about the relationship between being ready for co-ownership, having your practice become someone else's step, and archiving obsessively. Because I thought that was an interesting sort of contradiction, and I was a little bit unclear. So yeah, I'm interested in learning more about that.
I think, thank you for the question. I think kind of with the way, when I talked about, for example, John's decision in his work and the way sort of a similar decision made way into Gamsutl, it's this sort of like absorption of decisions or co-ownership of all the decisions that have been made before me. You know, I don't start anew. I don't believe in kind of an artist as a secluded ball of power or something like that. So it's this, and then kind of, but you have to be ready for the same thing, that you will recognize decisions in the practice that comes sort of after, whether you see it or not see it. So the link in archiving and sort of in these like boiling down methodologies is exactly that, is providing a template for my colleagues, my peers to use. And this is kind of, it leads into my wider interest and this work that I've sort of started on a publication about artistic methodologies and about artistic studio structures as these kind of like scaffolding forms that can like allow you to develop works and can give you sort of ways of thinking that you don't necessarily have to invent from scratch. But it's also like, it's, I guess it's also kind of quite a simple thing. If we start not having 5 years of whispers of the art world and trying to kind of navigate and trying to learn how to dance with institutions, but know that, where would the practices be? Like, and that's what I'd like to see. That's what I'd like to imagine. Like if we jump that space of figuring out and navigation and finding for yourself. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely wonderful. Unfortunately, I have to bring this panel to the close, but one of the difficult decisions when we worked all together on this event was what participant put into which panel. So I hope at the end of the day we will have an opportunity to assemble again and ask questions to panelists together, and there will be more room for discussion and exchange of ideas. There will be a break now, and we welcome everyone at 2 p.m. at 14h, après le pause déjeuner. Please come back for the second panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.